We often assume a better day begins with doing more, waking earlier, moving faster, pushing harder. But in reality, many difficult days begin for the exact same reason. We start them in a state of inner disorder and call it discipline. That is what makes certain Japanese morning habits so striking. They are not extreme, impressive, or performative, yet they often create something far more valuable than early productivity, a calmer internal rhythm that makes the rest of the day easier to carry. So before we talk about efficiency, we need to look at the quieter mechanics of how a morning shapes the mind. What makes these habits worth noticing is not that they look extraordinary from the outside. They do not belong to the world of heroic self-improvement. They are not built around punishment, obsession, or the pressure to prove that you are stronger than everyone else before sunrise. In fact, much of their power comes from how ordinary they are. And perhaps that is exactly why they matter. Because the difference between a heavy day and a steady one is often decided long before anything dramatic happens. It can begin in the first few minutes after waking, when the body is technically awake, but the mind has not quite arrived yet. That soft in-between state is fragile, and what we place into it matters more than we think. Many of us begin the day by surrendering it almost immediately. Before our feet touch the floor, our attention is already elsewhere. Notifications, messages, news, deadlines, someone else's opinion, someone else's urgency, someone else's mood. The mind opens its eyes, and within seconds, the world is already leaning in, asking for something. Nothing disastrous has happened, and yet the day already feels slightly off. That is a strange thing about certain mornings. They do not begin with catastrophe. They begin with a subtle internal misalignment. You brush your teeth too quickly. You get dressed without really being present. You leave the house feeling as though you are already catching up to a day that started without you. And the more you try to speed up, the more scattered you feel inside. From a distance, this looks like nothing, just an ordinary morning. But underneath it, something more important is being set, your internal pace. And once that pace is disturbed, the rest of the day often becomes an attempt to recover from a beginning that never quite settled. This is where many Japanese morning habits offer a useful contrast, not because they promise some magical transformation, and not because everyone in Japan lives in a perfectly balanced way, but because the pattern itself reveals something simple and intelligent. Instead of beginning the day with immediate mental noise, the morning is often shaped through small acts of order. Open the curtains, let in daylight, fold the bedding, wash the face, drink water, prepare a simple breakfast, put the room back into a state that feels livable, step outside and walk with some awareness of the air, the temperature, the light, the movement of the street. It is all very modest, almost too modest, and that is precisely the point. These habits are not trying to impress anyone. They are not designed to look inspirational from the outside. Their function is quieter than that. They help the body and mind move from rest into alertness without being thrown straight into fragmentation. They do not demand that you become a machine. They simply prevent you from entering the day already internally split. That may sound small, but it changes everything, because a morning is not just the first chapter of the day. It is the tone-setting moment in which the nervous system begins to decide what kind of world it is waking into. A rushed, overstimulated opening tells the body that everything is already urgent. A steadier opening says something very different. There is time to arrive, time to orient, time to meet the day instead of colliding with it. This is why actions as basic as light, water, movement, and order can have such an outsized effect. They are not dramatic interventions, they are signals. Daylight tells the body that night has ended. Washing the face and drinking water mark a transition. Gentle movement reminds the system that it is safe to wake fully. A tidy surface or a prepared corner of the room removes tiny points of friction that the mind would otherwise have to wrestle with. And friction is more exhausting than people realize. A great deal of morning fatigue does not come from hard work. It comes from needless mental drag. What should I wear? Where are my keys? Did I charge my phone? What should I eat? Should I answer that message now? Should I check the news? Did I forget something? None of these questions are enormous on their own, but stacked together, they begin to drain clarity before the day has properly begun. This is one of the more understated lessons we can take from Japanese routines. A smoother morning is often created not by adding more, but by removing what does not need to be there. Fewer unnecessary decisions, fewer visual distractions, fewer abrupt transitions, less friction between waking and functioning. That is why the environment matters too. In many Japanese spaces, even small domestic ones, there's often an attentiveness to arrangement, to emptiness, to the relationship between mood and surroundings. A pair of shoes placed neatly by the door, a table that is cleared rather than crowded, a kitchen corner that feels ready instead of chaotic, a window that is opened not only for fresh air, but almost as a gesture of beginning. These details are not merely aesthetic, they shape behavior. When a space is calmer, the mind has less to fight against. When the room is already shouting, the day begins in noise. When the room is readable, the day begins with a little more ease. And there's something deeper still beneath all of this. What many of these habits seem to protect is not productivity in the narrow sense, but dignity of pace. The morning is not treated solely as a launch pad for output. It is also a threshold, a crossing point between the private self and the demands of the outer world. And how you cross that threshold matters. If you cross it abruptly in reaction mode, the world enters you before you have entered yourself. But if you cross it with even a small amount of attention, then you carry something into the day that is easy to underestimate and very difficult to replace later: inner coherence. That is why this is not really a story about doing what Japanese people do in a literal copied way. It is about understanding the principle beneath the gestures. The lesson is not that you must adopt someone else's culture like a costume. The lesson is that a good morning rarely begins with intensity. It begins with alignment. Before output, regulation. Before speed, orientation. Before the world, a moment with yourself. And perhaps this is what so many modern mornings are missing. We live in a culture that rewards immediate reaction, immediate replies, immediate updates, immediate engagement. The result is that the first minutes of the day, which could have served as a quiet act of self-organization, are often given away to whatever's loudest. Then we spend the rest of the day wondering why we feel mentally pulled apart, emotionally thin, and oddly tired even when nothing terrible has happened. The truth is, much of what we call a bad day is actually a badly entered day. Not always, of course. Some days are genuinely difficult. Some mornings are shaped by responsibilities. Children, shift work, long commutes, exhaustion, grief, or circumstances no routine can neatly solve. But even then, there's often still value in protecting one or two small acts that help you arrive more fully in yourself. Not an ideal morning, not a perfect morning, just a kinder one. That might mean not reaching for your phone immediately. It might mean opening the curtains before opening your messages. It might mean drinking water before checking the news. It might mean preparing breakfast without rushing every second. It might mean standing still for one quiet moment in the kitchen while the kettle warms. It might mean choosing one deliberate action that tells your mind, gently but clearly, the day has begun, and you do not need to begin it in panic. This is why small rituals matter. Not because they are mystical, but because repetition builds trust. When the body recognizes a familiar sequence, it stops having to guess. And when it stops having to guess, it wastes less energy defending itself against uncertainty. A simple routine becomes a form of reassurance, not flashy reassurance, not motivational reassurance, just the steady kind that lets you feel less internally pushed around. In that sense, the Japanese approach to morning life can feel almost radical in its restraint. It does not insist that you dominate the day. It asks whether you can meet it without immediately losing your center. That is a quieter ambition, and perhaps a wiser one. Because a favorable day is not a day without stress. It is a day in which stress does not seize control of you too early. It is a day in which irritation does not spread so quickly. A day in which a difficult email does not instantly define your mood. A day in which your attention is still available for what actually matters, because it was not spent recklessly in the first 10 minutes after waking. And that is why changing a morning does not always feel dramatic at first. The shift can be almost invisible. You do not become a new person overnight. You do not suddenly become serene, disciplined, and perfectly balanced. What changes first is subtler than that. You feel less jagged, less hurried inside, less as though the day has its hands around your collar before you have even begun. Then, over time, the consequences become easier to notice. You respond instead of reacting. You carry your focus a little longer. You enter conversations with less friction. You move through inconvenience with slightly more room inside yourself. The day is not easier because life has changed, but because you did not start by making it harder than it needed to be. And maybe that is the most humane lesson hidden inside all of this. A better day does not always require a stronger self. Sometimes it only requires a gentler beginning. So if there is anything worth trying tomorrow morning, let it be small enough to repeat. Not a complete reinvention, not a punishing routine, just one adjustment that allows you to enter the day more cleanly. Open the curtains sooner, put the phone aside for a few minutes longer, prepare one thing the night before, drink water in silence, step into the light before stepping into everyone else's demands. Then notice what follows. Notice whether the day still feels like something that happens to you, or something you are at least partly present for. Notice whether your mind scatters quite so quickly. Notice whether your body seems to resist the day a little less. Notice whether a calmer morning creates even the slightest widening of space between an event and your response to it. Because that space is where steadiness lives. And for many people, that steadiness is not built through grand decisions. It is built through the humble architecture of ordinary mornings, through gestures so basic they are easy to dismiss, through habits that do not look life-changing, precisely because they are designed to support life rather than perform it. Many Japanese morning routines seem to understand this instinctively. They do not treat the beginning of the day as a stage on which to prove worth. They treat it as a foundation, a way of helping the body feel lighter, the mind feel clearer, and the self feel just gathered enough to step into whatever the world brings. You may not feel the effect after one morning. You may not even notice it immediately. But after a while, you begin to realize something quietly important. When the morning is no longer taken from you in fragments, the rest of the day becomes less uneven. Not because life becomes simple, but because you are no longer abandoning yourself at the very start of it. And perhaps the change you have been looking for was never hidden inside some extreme discipline, some impossible wake-up hour, or some perfect routine copied from someone else's life. Perhaps it begins much closer than that. In the way you open one ordinary morning, in the way you let yourself arrive, in the way you choose not to begin the day in chaos. If tomorrow is going to feel different, it may not be because you did more. It may be because, at last, you began better.